Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to walk you through the persuasive outline template. I'm going to try to walk you through how to organize your persuasive speech and what all parts of this outline refer to. And so this video could get a little bit long, similar to the last one where I went over the last outline template. So I would like you to just follow along as you're completing your outline template for your persuasive speech. And you may be able to pause as you go through, but hopefully you find this useful to help you with organizing your speech, because there's very specific ways to do this. So to start, as an example, we will do a speech on texting and driving, because I see so many students do speeches on texting and driving, and it's not a topic that will really be relevant to your speech, so we're just going to use this for example purposes. Texting and driving is my topic. I'll put my name. So topic is, we'll say, banning texting and driving. My general purpose here is going to always be to persuade. Remember that the general purpose is either to inform, to persuade, or entertain. So for this speech, the last speech is to persuade. So my specific purpose, to persuade my audience that texting and driving should be banned. My central idea thesis statement, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but that is going to be the statement of my three main points. And so for this speech, since we're using Monroe's motivated sequence, the three main points are actually the need, satisfaction, and visualization, or as I'm going to rename it, the problem solution visualization. But like I said, we're going to come back to this in a minute after we've done our introduction. So our introduction, we always, again, start with the attention getter. That's the same, and that is step one in Monroe, is gain attention of your audience. So we could start with a startling statistic here about texting and driving, but I think this would be a great place to show a visual aid of a car crash. So I will say, show video of car crash. Why should you and the audience care? That's your relation to the audience. We can say something like, and I'm going to make up statistics. So again, these are not real statistics. I'm totally making these up for example purposes. According to drivingfacts.com, I'm sure a very credible website, we'll say 40% of crashes are due to distracted driving, such as texting. Perhaps you or someone you know will be involved, will be, we'll say, part of this 40%. We've now related that to the audience. So why are you personally credible? This is where we establish our ethos. I have researched this topic. It can be something as simple as that. It can explain your firsthand experience. I have a PhD in, driving. I teach driving school, whatever. Okay, so now we're going to state our three main points. So today, I'd like to discuss the problems with texting and driving, propose a new law against texting and driving, and explain the benefits. So again, we have our need, solution, and then visualization as main point 3. Or we can say problem, solution, visualization. So our transition to body. Let's start by discussing the problem. Okay, so again, the need is actually the problem. I like to use the term problem here instead of need, because I think what I see from students is that need means, tell me why this is needed. And then it's really easy to focus on the benefits. So when we talk about texting and driving, if I tell you, tell me why a law against texting and driving is needed. You'll be like, because it will save lives. That's why it's needed. Okay, but that's not a problem. That's actually a visualization. That's a benefit of it. So, and the problem step, we want to actually take the time to explain what the problem is. And you're after the problem step, you want the audience to feel like, we better do something about this. So you want them to feel that need for change. That's what we mean by need. Again, I think that term gets kind of confusing, so I really like to use the word problem here. So the problem, this is where we find a lot of our research. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make our claim, and we're going to say texting and driving is a problem. Now we're going to provide some evidence to explain why is this a problem. So we're going to make up some evidence and say, when you text and drive, you are driving like you are drunk, according to David Drinker. Again, probably a really, really credible source. We should probably explain who he is for our credibility. Author of the book, Distracted Driving. Now, ideally, I'd probably have a few statistics in there to back it up, but I think you get the idea. I'm going to provide another piece of evidence that will say some deaths occurred from texting and driving. So we'll say something like, last year, 4,200 people lost their lives due to texting and driving. The problems with texting and driving are kind of endless here. You've heard all about it in the news. You can do a Google search for texting and driving and see all sorts of things. Of course, we do need a citation here. We did cite some statistics according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. So we've got two pieces of evidence. So now we need to create that conclusion. This is where we use our reasoning. So when you text and drive, you're driving like a drunk. Last year, a lot of people lost their lives due to texting and driving. So how can we put these two pieces of evidence together to form some sort of warrant or conclusion that ties these two pieces together that tells us why this supports drinking and texting and driving is a problem? So because we've got drunk driving here, the one piece I think that here is missing is that there's no evidence to say that when you're drunk that driving drunk that that's a problem. So let's try to connect that in here too. So we can say something like, because drunk driving is dangerous, and can be deadly, we can see that texting and driving is just as, if not more dangerous. There are laws against drunk driving, so why aren't there laws against texting and driving? So here we've kind of tried to make a connection. Now, it's not a great connection because drunk driving is dangerous and can be deadly. So we really didn't establish evidence for that. So if you really want to make that conclusion, you're probably going to want to go back here and say you're driving like you're drunk, because the one thing we've left out then is we haven't really told the audience that drunk driving is really distracted driving. We kind of just assume the audience knows that. And more than likely they probably do, but in persuasive speaking, we probably don't want to make a lot of assumptions. We don't want to leave things up. We don't want the audience to have to think. The theory behind that is that there's really two routes for persuasion. And if we want the audience to adopt our message without thinking very much about it, we don't want them to have to critically think. That's why we teach you how to critically think in school. A lot of people don't know how to do it. So we don't want them to. We want to make a conclusion that just lays it all out for them, where everything is laid out and they don't have to fill in any holes in the argument. So yeah, so ideally we should probably come up in here and say, say something about that we know drunk driving is, let's see, we could say drunk driving is extremely dangerous. Well, I guess we wouldn't say extremely dangerous, that'd be more of a judgment. We could say approximately 4,000 people lost their lives to drunk driving. And so we can make that connection then between those two to show us why texting and driving is a problem. And this is a great summary into, let's look at the solution. So now we're moving into our satisfaction and solution. Ideally, this should be probably more of an internal summary. So now that we've seen why texting and driving is a problem, let's look at the solution. Another thing that I see here, a lot of students will say something like, you know, now that we've seen there's a problem, luckily I have a solution to help with this. And that sometimes helps to make that connection as well. So let's talk about the solution. So the solution, we're gonna say, Iowa should create a law banning texting and driving. Yes, I am aware that Iowa already has a law for texting and driving. I said this is just for example purposes. So in this step, we are really describing the solution, and we're going to describe it in a lot of detail. So we're going to talk about every little bit and piece as to what this law would look like. And so we're going to say something like drivers can be pulled over if caught texting and driving and receive a $50 ticket. For a second offense, they will receive a, say, $75 ticket, and a third offense can result in them losing their, well, I would say, a suspended license. Okay, the evidence to support the solution, the best way to do this is to provide an example. And so look at another state. We'll say Illinois has adopted a similar ban. In Illinois, drivers caught texting and driving 3 times automatically lose, again, making all this up, their license. Since then, we can say something like this, car accidents due to distracted driving has decreased 50%. So the conclusion here should be pretty clear. If it works in Illinois, it should work in Iowa too. So again, we have another transition. So now that you are aware of the solution, let's discuss the benefits. We can say there are several benefits to this solution. And how does the solution solve your problem? So this is simple. By banning texting and driving, people will be less likely to engage in distracted driving due to cell phone use. And then we can start describing the benefits. There would be less car accidents and less deaths. The best way to do this is to really refer back to the problem step. So we can go, what were the things we do? Say that 4,200 lives per year that could be saved. Another benefit, and then I have in here example for how your solution will work. We kind of covered that already. But we can say an example for how the solution will work. And again, we don't want to use the example of the other state this time. We want to say, imagine a world where people's attention is on the road and not on their phones. And then transition to conclusion. So we can say, so in conclusion, and then in the conclusion, the first thing we do is summarize the main points. So today we've discussed the problems of texting and driving, the solution of banning it, and the benefits. So relate back to your audience. If my solution is enacted, you or someone you love won't be a statistic. And then finally, a call to action. What can you do? Call your representative today. Now, just a couple suggestions for best practices here in each step, because again, this is a really basic solution. A lot of it was made up. This is more to show you outline format. But just a couple of ideas. One thing in the solution step, one of the most common things that I see in the solution step is students focusing on the benefits. So you really want to be really specific about describing the solution, like define it. So for example, for this one with texting and driving, what we'd probably really want to do here, we've described the law, but we'd really want to define what we mean by texting as well. So just try to think of every single detail as you're going through here. In the problem step, the biggest thing that I find students do in the problem step is not describing the problem. Like I said, you focus too much on the need, or they spend too much time talking about things like you have the statistics, but you don't explain why that's a large number. So, so one thing here where we have the statistic, last year 4,200 people lost their lives. Okay, so put that into perspective. What is 4,200 people? You know, you hear that and you're like, well, you know, is that in the US? Is that in Iowa? 4,200 people in the city of Cedar Rapids? That would be like a huge statistic. And you could then take that one step further and explain what that actually means. 4,200 people in the entire world, you know, maybe sounds a little bit less. So try to put the statistics in perspective that you use, try to explain them. That's another great example of using those conclusions and those reasoning to help, and to also help relate it to the audience. What I don't want to see is the problem step just spitting out a whole bunch of statistics without any sort of explanation as to how they help your argument. And then finally, I know I did some of this is kind of a backwards order. In the visualization, try to focus really on the benefits. Now, in readings and stuff with Monroe's motivated sequence, they like to talk about with Monroe that you can explain the negatives within the visualization. So you can explain what happens if your solution isn't enacted. And in my opinion, that's just restating the problem. I actually don't really like to see that because I feel like the visualization should be leaving the audience, since this is your last main point, with hope for the future if your solution's enacted, and not fear for the future if your solution isn't enacted. We've talked about fear appeals, and I think with the fear appeals, really the most important thing to do is we start with, you know, that emotion, and then We relieve that emotion. So in my opinion, if we create the fear in the problem step, we create then the resolution in the solution step, we wouldn't want to go back and create the fear again. We would want to keep relieving the fear, and that, in my opinion, would be more persuasive. So try to focus on the positives. And then the thing that I see in the end, most commonly missed, is the miss to the call to action step. So you're going to want to do that call to action, call your representative. This is specifically what can the audience do. So you don't want to just end your speech with, you know, if my solution's enacted, you or someone you love won't be a statistic. Thanks. You don't want to end with just thanks. You want to explain to the audience, what can they do? And then the very last step, you'll take your sources, you'll put them in APA or MLA format. So hopefully that gives you a better idea for organizing this speech.